the things that we can see in the public domain that would give us the evidence to make that, to come to that conclusion. And it's funny that you should mention the Japan earthquake, because that and its consequent repercussions is part of the evidence that we're going to present, that in fact there are some very strange things going on this planet right now that we're not supposed to be privy to. And what we think is normal, what we think is one thing, in fact, could have another set of causes. And we're going to explore with some pretty good evidence what those causes could be and their implications.
The question obviously that comes up is, are we looking at a situation where a few, selected few, or elected, whatever you want to call it, have broken off in one way, potentially, and now are on a totally different mission than what we get in terms of the official story about what is happening with the space program? Let's talk a little bit, Richard, about some of the motives for this, and you mentioned, you even tie in the potential, or the already unfolding nuclear, disaster that's happening in Japan right now. It seems like things on the Earth are going bad real quick. The BP oil spill recently, now this radiation leak. There's been tons of other similar, maybe a little bit smaller here and there, though, similar accidents happening around the world. But what is going on? What is happening? Are they leaving us here to die and taking off into space, Richard?
Well, this now goes, again, back to the work of Dolan and Lavenda. Dr. Joseph Farrell, who I believe you had on your show, was supposed to be an attendee at the conference, and because of some personal things could not make it, so I'm going to be presenting some of his data. So I'm most familiar with Joseph's work, which goes back to the middle and end of World War II, where we now have very good evidence based on documents that have been released from various security agencies, particularly in Eastern Europe, that document that there was an extraordinary secret technological and research effort during the frantic days at the end of the war by the Germans, by the Nazis, to develop some extraordinarily remarkable technologies based on this physics that I and others have been discussing now for some years, which is in fact the real physics, how the universe really works, and the stuff that we see, in textbooks and classrooms and even in our in industrial sectors is kind of a pale, watered-down version, carefully controlled, not to reveal the good stuff. Now, what do I mean by the good stuff? This technology, if you pursue it to its ultimate goal, allows you to control gravity. It is literally the holy grail of gravitational research. It allows you to make machines, technologies, ships, vehicles, which can negate gravity and which can float and hover and accelerate to extraordinary speeds, definitely light years, using a kind of a metaphor, beyond the primitive rockets and Newtonian kind of physics that we all think is forever the end-all and be-all of traveling in outer space. Coupled with that, the same physics, the same technology, if you create it properly, if you create the proper technological devices, allows you to tap into an unlimited amount of so-called free energy. So you combine the energy, which can be in the form of electricity or some other very controllable modality that we are familiar with. You combine that with the control of gravity, and you have the universe by the tail. I mean, there's a joke in the West, in the United States particularly, which goes something like, where does an 800-pound gorilla sleep? And the answer, of course, is anywhere it wants to. Well, this is the same problem we're now having with this secret hidden track of physics and technology. The people who are controlling it, the people who have been developing it for the last, if Joseph is right, 60, 70 years, they're like the 800-pound gorilla. They now have the technological capability to live anywhere they want to, including any hostile, forbidden environment on any other planet in the solar system, or their satellites and moons, or the spaces around the sun in orbit. And we are totally in the shadow of their capabilities. Now, Dolan has taken this idea, and I think it's very appropriate, and he's looked at it from a historical point of view, which is if human beings developed in secret that kind of parallel capability, which would then get farther and farther away from what we all consider to be normal and possible, meaning civilization on Earth that we see on CNN and, Red Ice and Coast and Fox and national television networks from Russia, Europe, et cetera, what would it lead to? And what Dolan has concluded, and I agree, as does Joseph, but I guess Lavenda and even Timothy, so we're all going to be in basic agreement on this point, is it would lead to what Dolan has termed properly, I think, a breakaway civilization.
Right.
And when you try to put numbers to this, it's very, very difficult, because I know people say, or they ask, well, how far ahead of us would they be? That's not really an appropriate question, because that assumes that our historical database, and our historical experience of, for instance, let's say transportation, going from horses to carriages, to horseless carriages, the first trains, to diesel trains, to jet aircraft, that kind of trend line is going to be duplicated in these technologies, and the answer is it is not. Because these technologies are so godlike, and I use that term very precisely, because if you understand how the fundamental structure of the universe really works, and you then construct technologies that allow you to manipulate those forces directly, you have the command and control of not only energy and unlimited resources, but you also probably have technologies that can interfere with the so-called natural biological life cycles of human beings or other living creatures on Earth. And lifespans can be extended probably thousands or even maybe tens of thousands of years because of the ability to repair entropic breakdown of DNA and the ends of DNA, those telomeres is what they're called, which seem to control our aging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this breakaway civilization, if Dolan and I and Joseph and Belinda and Timothy and others are correct, there is almost no way to realistically calibrate how far ahead of us they are. I would say, using our crude historical rule of thumb, they could be 1,000 years ahead of us by now, even though it's only 60 years. Now, think about that. I mean, just think about that. If you have a group of fanatic, dedicated Nazis with their perspective on the rest of human beings, humanity on Earth, where they consider most of humanity, which is not white and blonde-haired, to be basically a primitive inferior species, how would a civilization imbued with technological capabilities that allow them to, at some level, even move planets, let me repeat that, to actually move celestial objects? Because remember, this allows you to negate inertia and gravity and control the forces of gravity so you could set up your own orbits, et cetera, et cetera. If those types of capabilities are in the hands of Nazis, like we've seen in all those movies, I mean, we are in deep, deep trouble. And that is the focus of this conference, to explore the scientific evidence that, in fact, that has, in fact, occurred.
I mean, Farrell talked about even the bailout money being tied into this. Basically, obviously, there must be a question here of how this thing is or was then at least funded. I mean, if they're so advanced at this point, they could probably go out there, get whatever resource they would want, gold, diamonds, oil, what have you, things we don't even might know about at this point. But how do you think that this thing was started?
Let me stop you there, because I think you raised a really important point. I presume you have watched Star Trek, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Gene Roddenberry, my dear departed friend, created this amazing vision of a human race living and working together and encountering alien species and living and working together with them in the so-called Federation of Planets, right? And from time to time, they will have scripts or story arcs where people who are still primitive like us, meaning that they are dealing with limited resources, limited energy, limited environment, living space, etc., encounter representatives of the Federation. And it was Gene's great pride to talk about how at that point in time we will have bypassed the concept of money, of possession of big stuff, not personal stuff, but big stuff. And the reason is just what you said. If you can tap the real forces of the universe, if you can provide access through some technological means to unlimited pollutionless energy in whatever form you desire, be it coherent, like electricity, radio technology, radio waves, lasers, whatever, or incoherent, like heat, just to keep yourself warm. And that allows you then to manipulate the resources of an entire solar system, or, and this is probably going to raise some eyebrows, to create matter out of nothing, out of empty space itself, out of the ether, which I have seen experiments that demonstrate that that's possible with this physics. Then you don't need money. You don't need the kind of primitive economy that we are dealing with. But reversing your question, who in that larger picture would still need money, and a lot of it, if they in fact are looking forward to some cataclysmic, shall we say, change in the planet here itself in the foreseeable future? Obviously, the terrestrial representatives of this breakaway civilization here on Earth, still kept, still trapped, still here within our civilization and amongst us. And if you wanted to identify a class of people that would describe, I think I'm describing the banksters. I think describing the people who run the world, because they do control the money of our primitive economy and society. And so all these trillions of dollars that are going into some black hole, because it's certainly not going into what it's being purported that they were being taken from taxpayers to be used for. I think that is a stash or a secret fund or a basically pirate treasure that these rip-off artists are taking from the rest of us, so they can somehow carve out their own separate civilization when push comes to shove, and these other guys decide that they no longer need 6 billion of us on planet Earth. And that time appears to be approaching from the circumstantial evidence we're seeing, given the rate at which things are accelerating in the financial markets, in terms of global geology, in terms of very bizarre anomalies taking place around the Earth. So I think not only are we looking at a secret space program, but we're probably looking now at a secret space war being fought between those on Earth who are trying to maintain their position